Flames kissed the midnight sky, shattering the quiet of downtown Chicago. 1 second, Matteo Rossi was a ghost ruling the city's underworld. The next, he was flat on the concrete, his life saved by a minimum-wage waitress. She hadn't known his name, his sins, or the empire he commanded. She only knew the idling black Lincoln was a death trap. By pulling him back from the blast, she didn't just save a monster. She became his only weakness. But before the fire and the chaos, there was only the rain. Rain lashed against the greasy front windows of Diner 82, a forgotten joint tucked deep in Chicago's industrial district. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and fried onions. Harley Quinn mindlessly wiped down booth 4, her cheap uniform clinging to her skin. 10 hours into a double shift, her sneakers squeaked against the checkered linoleum. She embraced the grueling hours, desperate to chip away at the staggering medical bills her younger sister, Lily, had racked up at Northwestern Memorial. Harley didn't mind the physical exhaustion. It was the deafening silence of the 2 a.m. slump that invited unwanted panic about final notices and eviction threats. Yet, on Tuesday nights, that silence always broke exactly at 2:15 a.m. The bell chimed. Harley didn't need to look up. 3 heavy sets of footsteps crossed the threshold. Leading them was Matteo Rossi. Constructed of sharp angles and tailored Italian wool, he moved with a quiet, lethal grace that demanded total submission. His dark hair was meticulously swept back, but it was his eyes that forced people to look away, calculating and completely void of warmth. Flanking him were his usual shadows: Luca, a scarred mountain of a man, and Enzo, who looked more like a ruthless Wall Street banker adjusting his designer cuffs. They slid into booth 4. Matteo took the side facing the door, his back to the wall, a tactical choice Harley had noticed the first time they walked in 6 months ago. "Evening," Harley said, her voice steady as she approached with a fresh pot. She prided herself on keeping her hands from shaking. Matteo looked up, his dark gaze locking onto hers. "Black," he murmured, his gravelly baritone vibrating in the empty room. She flipped the heavy ceramic mug and poured. No menus were offered. None were needed. Luca would get scrambled eggs with hot sauce, Enzo a dry turkey club, and Matteo, the man who secretly controlled half the city's illegal ports, always ordered a single slice of cherry pie. "Cherry pie coming right up," she said, turning on her heel. Gary Henderson, the night manager, was hiding in the kitchen, pretending to inventory the walk-in freezer. He always did when Matteo's crew arrived. Gary had once whispered to Harley that Matteo was the head of the Rossi Syndicate, a ruthless crime family that had recently swallowed up the territory of the O'Connor mob. Harley hadn't cared. To her, Matteo was just the guy who left a crisp $100 bill under his coffee saucer every week. That $100 was the difference between Lily getting her medication and going without. Returning to the table, Harley set the pie in front of Matteo. The cherry filling oozed slightly onto the white porcelain. "Rough night out there," Harley noted, glancing at the rain battering the window. It was a casual comment, breaking her usual rule of strict professionalism, but exhaustion had loosened her tongue. Matteo paused, his fork hovering over the pastry. He looked at her, really looked at her, his dark eyes sweeping over her tired face, the dark circles under her eyes, and the name tag pinned slightly crooked on her chest. "Storms always pass, Harley," he replied, using her name for the very first time. It sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "It's what's left behind in the wreckage that matters." Enzo shifted uncomfortably, and Luca kept his eyes glued to the street outside. The tension at the table was thicker than usual. Word on the street, or at least the whispers Gary brought back from the off-track betting parlors, was that Larry O'Connor, The disgraced Irish mob boss was looking to retaliate for the hostile takeover of his South Side operations. Matteo's inner circle was on high alert, but Matteo himself seemed completely unbothered, methodically eating his pie as if he had all the time in the world. Harley nodded, stepping back to let them eat in peace. She retreated behind the counter, pretending to organize the sugar packets while discreetly watching them. There was a strange gravity to Matteo Rossi. He was a man who lived in the shadows, yet he didn't hide. He sat in a brightly lit diner, eating cherry pie, daring the world to come for him. At 2:45 a.m., they stood up to leave. Matteo adjusted his dark overcoat, his eyes briefly catching Harley's across the diner. He gave a microscopic nod, turning toward the door. Harley walked over to clear the table. Beneath the coffee saucer was the usual crisp, folded $100 bill. But tonight, there was something else. A small, elegant business card with a single phone number printed on it. No name, no address, just 10 digits. She stared at it, her heart beating a little faster. Why would he leave this? She instinctively slipped the card into her apron pocket, just as Gary finally emerged from the kitchen, wiping his sweaty forehead with a rag. "They're gone?" Gary rasped, looking around nervously. "Yeah, Gary, you're safe," Harley sighed, dumping the dirty dishes into a plastic tub. "You shouldn't talk to him so casually, kid," Gary warned, leaning against the counter. "Guys like Matteo Rossi don't have friends. They have assets and they have targets. You don't want to be either." Thursday night rolled in with a biting cold that cut through layers of clothing like a razor. It was Matteo's off-schedule night. He wasn't supposed to be at the diner. But at 1:30 a.m., the familiar black Lincoln Town car pulled up to the curb, its headlights cutting through the freezing fog. Harley was in the back alley, wrestling a massive trash bag into the overflowing dumpster. The alley was poorly lit, the single sodium bulb above the back door flickering aggressively. She shivered, her breath pluming in the icy air, wishing she had brought her heavier coat instead of her thin denim jacket. As she slammed the dumpster lid shut, a metallic clink caught her attention. She froze. The sound had come from the front of the alley, near the street where Matteo's Lincoln was parked. Peering around the edge of the brick building, Harley narrowed her eyes against the darkness. A figure was crouched by the rear passenger side of the Lincoln. It wasn't Luca, and it wasn't Enzo. The man was thin, wearing a dark hoodie and a faded Chicago Cubs jacket. He was working fast, his hands frantically moving near the undercarriage of the vehicle. Harley held her breath, watching as the man clipped something, gave a sharp tug, and then bolted, disappearing down the street and melting into the fog like a phantom. Harley's mind raced. Someone was stealing the catalytic converter? No, this was Matteo Rossi's car. You don't steal parts from a mob boss unless you have a death wish. Then, the grim reality of Gary's whispers flooded her mind. Larry O'Connor is looking to retaliate. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped her chest. She sprinted toward the front of the diner, pushing through the heavy glass doors just as Matteo was paying for his quick cup of coffee at the register. He was alone tonight. No Luca. No Enzo. A fatal mistake. "Keep the change," Matteo was saying to Gary, who was visibly trembling while ringing up the sale. Matteo turned, his dark overcoat billowing slightly, and walked toward the exit. He pushed the door open, the chime ringing out like a death knell in Harley's ears. "Wait!" Harley screamed. Matteo paused, one foot on the pavement, looking back at her over his shoulder with a raised brow. It was a look of mild irritation, mixed with curiosity. "Don't get in the car!" she yelled, ignoring the bewildered look on Gary's face. She ran around the counter, her sneakers slipping slightly on the wet floor, and burst out the front door into the freezing night. Matteo had already taken 3 steps toward the Lincoln. His hand was reaching for the chrome handle of the rear passenger door. "I said stop!" Harley lunged, grabbing the heavy fabric of his overcoat and pulling backward with every ounce of strength she possessed. Matteo staggered back, caught entirely off guard by the sheer force of the waitress. "What the hell are you—" He didn't get to finish his sentence. Harley's sudden yank had pulled them both backward, stumbling over the wet curb. As Matteo's hand slipped from the door handle, the car's proximity sensor, or a remote detonator, triggered. A blinding flash of white light erupted from beneath the Lincoln. For a fraction of a second, the world went completely silent. Then, the shockwave hit. The force of the explosion was like a physical wall of heat and pressure, lifting Harley and Matteo off their feet and throwing them backward onto the unforgiving concrete. The sound was deafening, a thunderous roar that shattered the diner's front windows into a million glittering pieces. Fire surged into the sky, a violent bloom of orange and red that consumed the Lincoln instantly. Shrapnel rained down, pinging against the brick walls and tearing through the metal street signs. Harley hit the ground hard, her head bouncing against the pavement. The breath was knocked out of her lungs, replaced by the suffocating smell of burning rubber, gasoline, and scorched metal. Her ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the car alarms blaring down the street. She lay there, dazed, blinking through the smoke and ash that drifted down like snow. Her vision was blurry, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Suddenly, a heavy weight shifted off her. Matteo! He had twisted mid-air to take the brunt of the fall, shielding her from the worst of the blast and the flying glass. Matteo groaned, pushing himself up onto his hands and knees. His overcoat was scorched, his face smudged with soot, and a thin line of crimson trickled from a cut on his forehead. He looked at the blazing inferno that used to be his car, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. The rear passenger side, exactly where he would have been sitting, was a crater of twisted, molten steel. He slowly turned his head, his gaze dropping to Harley, who was struggling to sit up. The irritation that had been in his eyes just moments ago was entirely gone. In its place was a chilling, intense focus. "You saw them," Matteo stated. It wasn't a question. Harley coughed, her throat raw from the smoke. "A guy. Cubs jacket. Crouching by the tire." Matteo's jaw tightened. Jimmy O'Connor, Larry's nephew, the little rat. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The Chicago Police Department was fast, but in this neighborhood, they were usually too late to do anything but tape off a crime scene. Matteo reached down, his strong hand gripping Harley's arm, pulling her to her feet with alarming ease despite the blast. "Can you walk?" I think so," Harley stammered, her legs trembling violently. She looked back at the diner. Gary was standing in the shattered doorway, unharmed but looking absolutely horrified, staring at the blazing wreck, and then at Matteo holding Harley. "The cops are coming," Harley panicked. "I need to give a statement. I saw him." "No," Matteo said sharply, his grip on her arm tightening just enough to let her know she wasn't in control of this situation. "You don't talk to the police. You don't mention Jimmy O'Connor. You don't mention me. But if Jimmy knows you saw him, he won't stop until you're quiet permanently," Matteo interrupted, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears like a blade. "Larry O'Connor doesn't leave witnesses. If you stay here and talk to Detective Miller, or whoever they send, you'll be dead before the morning news airs." Harley's blood ran cold. The reality of what she had just done crashed over her. She hadn't just saved a customer. She had involved herself in a mob war. She had ruined a hit. A sleek black SUV came screeching around the corner, its tires smoking as it slammed on the brakes just inches from the burning Lincoln. The doors flew open, and Luca and Enzo spilled out, guns drawn, their eyes frantically scanning the smoke-filled street. "Boss!" Luca yelled, lowering his weapon when he saw Matteo standing. "I'm fine," Matteo barked, waving them off. He looked back down at Harley. The sirens were deafening now, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement at the end of the block. "You saved my life, Harley," Matteo said softly, the intensity in his gaze pinning her in place. "Which means your life now belongs to me. You're coming with us." "I can't!" she protested, trying to pull her arm away. "My sister will be protected," Matteo finished, dragging her toward the waiting SUV. "Get in. Now." Silence in Matteo Rossi's world was never truly quiet. It was heavy with the weight of unsaid threats and pending violence. Harley sat in the back seat of the armored SUV, shivering uncontrollably. The heater was blasting, but the cold she felt was bone deep, born of adrenaline and sheer terror. Luca was driving like a madman, weaving through the desolate back streets of Chicago, avoiding the main arteries where the police would be swarming. Enzo was in the passenger seat, barking rapid-fire Italian into a burner phone, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a feral intensity. Matteo sat next to her, staring out the tinted window into the darkness. He had handed her a clean handkerchief to wipe the soot from her face. But otherwise, he hadn't spoken since they fled the diner. Harley's mind was spinning out of control. Lily. She had to get to Lily. If the O'Connors knew who she was, would they go to the hospital? Dr. Caldwell was a good man, but he wasn't equipped to deal with mob hitmen. "My sister," Harley finally choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to call the hospital. I need to make sure she's safe." Matteo slowly turned his head. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold composure. "Enzo has already dispatched a team to Northwestern Memorial. 2 of my best men are sitting in the lobby, and 2 are outside her room. Nobody gets on that floor without my authorization." Harley stared at him, stunned. How do you know where she is?" "I make it my business to know everything about the people who serve my food, Harley," Matteo replied smoothly. "Lily Quinn, 18 years old, waiting on a heart transplant. Over $300,000 in medical debt, most of it held by creditors you can barely afford to pay the minimum interest on." A flush of anger broke through Harley's fear. "You investigated me?" "I investigate everyone," Matteo said, leaning closer. "When a woman works 80 hours a week and looks like she's carrying the weight of the world, I find out why. I knew your circumstances long before tonight." "Is that why you left the business card?" she asked, her hand instinctively brushing the pocket of her ruined apron where the card still sat. "I left the card because you looked like you were at your breaking point," Matteo admitted quietly. "I offer solutions to people who run out of options. But tonight you shifted the dynamic." The SUV descended into a subterranean parking garage beneath a towering luxury high-rise in the Gold Coast neighborhood. The heavy steel gates rolled down behind them, sealing them away from the chaos of the city. "Where are we?" Harley asked, clutching the door handle as the car parked in a private VIP bay. "My home," Matteo said, stepping out of the vehicle and buttoning his ruined coat out of habit. "It's the only place in the city where I know with absolute certainty that no one can get to you." Harley reluctantly slid out of the car, her legs feeling like lead. She followed Matteo, flanked by Luca and Enzo, into a private elevator that required a retinal scan and a keycard. The penthouse was exactly what she would have expected from a mafia boss. Expansive, minimalist, and terrifyingly cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, the very city Matteo held in a stranglehold. The furniture was all sharp leather and dark oak, immaculately clean. Enzo, get the doctor on the line, Matteo ordered, shrugging off his coat and tossing it onto a chair. Have him come up. She needs to be checked for a concussion, and I need this cut stitched. Right away, boss, Enzo said, disappearing down a long hallway. Matteo walked over to a crystal decanter on a wet bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He walked back and held one out to Harley. She stared at it, shaking her head. I don't drink. You do tonight, he commanded softly, pressing the glass into her trembling hands. Drink it. It will stop the shaking. Harley took a small sip. The whiskey burned like fire down her throat, but almost instantly a heavy warmth settled in her chest, steadying her ragged breathing. Matteo downed his glass in one fluid motion, setting it down with a sharp clink. He turned to face her, leaning against the edge of the bar, crossing his arms over his chest. Let me make the situation very clear to you, Harley, Matteo began, his voice dropping into a dangerous, silken register. Larry O'Connor ordered that hit. Jimmy planted the bomb. They failed because of you. By tomorrow morning, the entire underworld will know that the untouchable Matteo Rossi was saved by a diner waitress. Harley swallowed hard, wrapping her hands tightly around the crystal glass. So I'm a target. You are the ultimate prize, Matteo corrected. Larry knows I have a code. I always pay my debts. I owe you my life. In his eyes, if he takes you, he wounds my pride and proves to the city that I can't even protect the woman who saved me. You are now the biggest pawn on the board. I don't want to be a pawn, Harley snapped, stepping forward, the whiskey fueling her sudden bravery. I just want to go back to my life. I want to pay for my sister's surgery and pretend tonight never happened. Matteo's eyes darkened, and he pushed off the bar, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. He towered over her, his presence suffocating. That life is gone, Harley. It burned to ash the second that Lincoln exploded. If you walk out that door, you will be dead before noon, and your sister will be left completely unprotected. Tears stung Harley's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She glared up at him, her chest heaving. So what? Am I your prisoner? Matteo reached out, his thumb gently, almost reverently, wiping a streak of soot from her cheek. The contrast between his lethal reputation and the surprising gentleness of his touch made her breath hitch. You are my guest, Matteo whispered, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her eyes again. And you are my responsibility. Until Larry O'Connor is no longer breathing, you don't leave my sight. Before Harley could process the weight of his words, the penthouse elevator dinged. A gruff voice echoed through the foyer. Matteo! What the hell happened? The precinct is going crazy! Detective Thomas H. Miller stormed into the living room, flashing a badge, though his familiarity with Matteo suggested he was on the Rossi payroll. Miller stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Harley standing next to the city's most feared man, looking like she had just crawled out of a war zone. Who is she? Miller demanded, narrowing his eyes. Matteo stepped slightly in front of Harley, shielding her from the detective's view. She's nobody, Thomas, Matteo lied, his voice chillingly calm. Just a civilian who got caught in the crossfire. But you're going to make sure her name never appears on a single police report. Miller frowned, looking from Matteo to the trembling waitress. You know I can't bury this entirely, Rossi. The bomb squad is pulling pieces of your car out of the neighboring buildings. They know it was targeted. Let them know it was targeted, Matteo said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. In fact, I want Larry O'Connor to know exactly what he missed, because tomorrow we're not just taking his territory, we're taking his life. Harley stood in the shadow of the Mafia Boss, realizing with a cold knot of dread that she hadn't just saved a man from a burning car. She had just ignited a war that would burn the entire city to the ground. Morning broke over the Chicago skyline, casting a harsh, pale light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gold Coast penthouse. Harley Quinn woke with a start, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a fleeting second, she thought she was back in her cramped, drafty apartment in Logan Square. But the feel of 1,200 thread-count Egyptian cotton against her skin and the lingering scent of smoke and expensive cologne instantly snapped her back to reality. She sat up, wincing as a dull ache pulsed at the base of her skull, a parting gift from the blast wave. The guest bedroom she had been escorted to the night before was larger than her entire apartment. A sleek, modern wardrobe spanned one wall, and on the edge of the king-sized bed sat a neatly folded stack of clothes. A small, heavy piece of cream cardstock rested on top of the garments. Your uniform was unsalvageable. Wear these. We leave in an hour. Monsieur Harley threw off the duvet and inspected the clothes. A pair of tailored charcoal trousers, a soft cashmere cream turtleneck, and a pair of Italian leather loafers. They were in her exact size. The realization that Matteo Rossi had someone procure perfectly fitted designer clothing for her while the city was still sweeping up the ashes of his Lincoln was a chilling reminder of his reach. After a quick scalding shower in a marble bathroom that felt more like a spa, Harley dressed and cautiously stepped out into the hallway. The penthouse was a hive of quiet, lethal activity. 4 men in dark suits she hadn't seen the night before were stationed at various entry points. In the expansive living area, Enzo was hunched over a laptop on the glass dining table, speaking rapidly in Italian into a headset. Luca was cleaning a matte black tactical rifle on the kitchen island, wiping down the barrel with terrifying familiarity. And then there was Matteo. He was standing by the panoramic window, a phone pressed to his ear, a tumbler of espresso in his free hand. He wore a crisp navy suit, impeccably tailored with no tie. The only evidence of the previous night's chaos was a neat white butterfly bandage on his temple. "I don't care what the Port Authority says, Richard," Matteo spoke into the phone, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You tell Carmichael and Associates to freeze the offshore accounts linked to O'Connor's shell companies. If Larry wants to play with explosives, I'm going to suffocate his cash flow until he's begging for a bullet." Harley stood frozen in the hallway, eavesdropping on a conversation that could easily indict the man in a federal court. Matteo Rossi wasn't just a street thug. He was a corporate warlord, manipulating millions of dollars before breakfast. He ended the call, slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. Without turning around, he said, "The cashmere suits you, Harley." She jumped slightly. "Do you have eyes in the back of your head?" "Reflections," Matteo replied, gesturing to the glass window. He finally turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, the cold, calculating mob boss melted away, replaced by the man who had pulled her up from the burning pavement. His gaze swept over her, lingering on her face, checking for any new signs of distress. "How is your head?" "It aches," she admitted, crossing her arms defensively. "But I'm fine. I need to see my sister. You said I could see Lily." Matteo walked toward the kitchen, setting his espresso cup down. "And you will. But you need to understand the perimeter we are operating within. Larry O'Connor is wounded, frantic, and humiliated. My men hit 3 of his underground casinos at dawn. Right now, he is looking for any leverage he can find against me." "I am not your leverage," Harley said fiercely, stepping into the living room. "I'm just a waitress." "You were a waitress," Luca corrected, without looking up from his rifle. "Now, you're the boss's shadow. Get used to it, sweetheart." Matteo shot Luca a silencing glare, that immediately made the giant man snap his mouth shut. "We are moving you to the hospital under heavily guarded transport," Matteo explained, his tone softening only slightly as he turned his attention back to Harley. "You will have 20 minutes with Lily. You will act completely normal. You will not mention the diner, the explosion, or me. Dr. Harrison Caldwell has been instructed to fast-track her pre-op evaluations. Once she is stable enough, she is being moved." Harley's eyes widened. "Moved? Moved where?" "Out of the country," Matteo stated simply. "A private clinic in Geneva. The Rossi family holds a major stake in the facility. She will get her heart transplant, and she will have the best post-operative care money can buy. Far away from Chicago. Far away from the crossfire." The sheer magnitude of what he was offering, what he was demanding, stole the breath from her lungs. "A transplant in Geneva? Matteo, I can't pay for that. I owe hundreds of thousands of dollars just for her current care. I'm taking double shifts just to keep the lights on in her room." Matteo stepped directly into her personal space, the scent of bergamot and expensive leather wrapped around her. He reached out, his long fingers gently grasping her chin, tilting her face up so she was forced to meet his intense gaze. "You don't owe anyone a dime anymore," he murmured, his thumb brushing against her jawline. "Your debts were erased at 3 a.m. this morning. I bought the collection agency that held your paper, and I burned the files. You saved my life, Harley. The Rossi Syndicate takes care of its own. And you are now mine to protect." A shiver raced down her spine, a confusing mix of absolute terror and undeniable magnetism. She wanted to push him away, to scream about her independence, but the reality was stark. He was offering her sister a future. He was offering Lily life. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Take me to her." Transporting Matteo Rossi was a military operation. 3 identical black SUVs rolled out of the subterranean garage, weaving through the morning traffic of the Magnificent Mile in a synchronized shell game. Harley rode in the center vehicle, sandwiched between Matteo and Enzo. The tension inside the cabin was palpable. Every time a car idled too close at a red light, Enzo's hand drifted toward his concealed shoulder holster. Northwestern Memorial Hospital was a towering structure of glass and steel. When the convoy pulled into the VIP underground loading dock, a perimeter had already been established. Men in scrub-like uniforms, who clearly didn't have medical degrees, nodded to Matteo as they exited the vehicles. "Stay close," Matteo instructed, placing a firm, protective hand on the small of Harley's back. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her. They bypassed the public elevators, using a service lift that brought them directly to the cardiac intensive care floor. The sterile smell of bleach and antiseptic hit Harley instantly, a scent she had come to associate with fear and helplessness. But today, walking beside the most dangerous man in Chicago, she felt a strange, foreign sense of invulnerability. 2 of Matteo's men were posted outside room 412. They stepped aside seamlessly as Matteo opened the door. Lily was asleep, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the only sound in the dim room. She looked so fragile, her pale skin translucent against the white hospital sheets, tubes snaking across her pillow. Harley rushed to the bedside, tears instantly blurring her vision. She gently took her sister's frail hand, kissing her knuckles. "I'm here, Bug," she whispered. Matteo stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel. He watched the exchange with an unreadable expression, though a muscle feathered in his jaw. For a man who dealt in violence and intimidation, witnessing such raw, unconditional love was an anomaly. A moment later, Dr. Harrison Caldwell entered the room, a clipboard in hand. He stopped short when he saw Matteo, nervously adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Rossi," Dr. Caldwell stammered, clearly aware of the sudden change in hospital administration. We have the transfer papers ready for the Geneva clinic. Her vitals are stabilizing. If the air ambulance has a specialized cardiac team, she can be moved in 48 hours. Ensure it happens, Matteo commanded quietly. No administrative delays. Harley? Lily's weak voice broke the tension. Her heavy eyelids fluttered open, her gaze shifting from her sister to the imposing man in the doorway. Who is that? Harley forced a bright, reassuring smile, frantically wiping her tears. It's a friend, Lily. He's going to help us. You're going to get better. Lily offered a faint, exhausted smile before her eyes drifted shut again. I'm so tired, Harp. I know, baby. Just rest. Harley gently set Lily's hand down and turned to thank Dr. Caldwell. But as she moved, her eyes caught movement in the hallway through the small glass window of the door. An orderly was pushing a laundry cart toward the room. His head was down, a standard blue surgical cap covering his hair. But it was his hands that caught Harley's attention. They weren't the sanitized, careful hands of a hospital worker. They were calloused, scarred, and wrapped around the handle of the cart with white-knuckled tension. On his right wrist, partially hidden by the scrub sleeve, was a faded, jagged shamrock tattoo. The O'Connor Syndicate mark. Gary had described it to her once, after a rough night at the diner. Time seemed to slow down. The orderly let go of the cart, reaching beneath the pile of soiled hospital linens. Matteo! Harley screamed, lunging forward without thinking. Matteo's instincts were terrifyingly fast. Before Harley could even fully shout his name, he had already drawn a sleek, suppressed Glock from his jacket. But the assassin was equally fast. The orderly kicked the hospital door open, raising a sawed-off shotgun. Put! Put! Two muffled shots echoed from Matteo's weapon, precise and deadly, hitting the assassin squarely in the chest. But the man's finger was already contracting on the trigger. The deafening roar of the shotgun blast shattered the sterile quiet of the ICU. Matteo grabbed Harley by the waist, tackling her to the floor behind the heavy steel frame of Lily's motorized bed, just as the buckshot tore through the drywall where they had been standing a millisecond prior. Dust and debris rained down on them. Dr. Caldwell dropped to the floor, shrieking in terror, covering his head with his clipboard. Lily woke up screaming, the heart monitor instantly spiking into a frantic, high-pitched alarm. "Stay down!" Matteo roared over the chaos, his body completely covering Harley's, shielding her from the falling plaster. Outside the room, all hell broke loose. Enzo and the guards opened fire, the hallway erupting into a chaotic symphony of shouting and gunfire. It lasted less than 10 seconds, but to Harley, trapped beneath Matteo's solid, unyielding frame, it felt like an eternity. The shooting stopped, replaced by the groans of the wounded and the shouting of Matteo's men securing the corridor. Matteo rolled off her, instantly checking her over, his hands frantically gripping her shoulders. "Are you hit? Harley, look at me! Are you hit?" "No," she gasped, her chest heaving. "Lily! Check Lily!" Matteo vaulted up, his eyes scanning the bed. Miraculously, the heavy machinery of the bed frame had absorbed the spray of the shotgun. Lily was crying hysterically, but she was unharmed. Enzo burst into the room, his suit dusted with white drywall powder, his gun still drawn. "Boss, hallway is secure. 2 shooters down. We lost Marco." Matteo's face turned into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. It wasn't the calculated anger of a businessman. It was the raw, primal fury of an apex predator whose den had just been violated. He looked at the shattered door, at the crying teenager in the bed, and finally, down at Harley, who was trembling violently on the floor. "We're moving her now!" Matteo barked at Dr. Caldwell, hauling the terrified doctor to his feet by his collar. "Get her on a mobile gurney. You are coming with us. If her heart rate drops, I will personally carve yours out of your chest." "Matteo, wait," Enzo said, his voice dropping an octave, stepping closer to his boss. Nobody knew the hospital detail outside the inner circle. The O'Connors couldn't have mobilized a hit squad this fast unless they knew exactly where we were going. Harley watched the realization dawn on Matteo's face. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "We have a leak," Matteo whispered, his voice laced with venom. He reached down, pulling Harley up from the floor and tucking her tightly against his side, his arm an iron band around her waist. "Trust no one," Matteo ordered Enzo, his eyes scanning the ruined hallway. "We take the service stairs. We vanish. And when I find out who sold us out, I'm going to make sure Larry O'Connor listens to them scream." Adrenaline flooded Harley's veins, drowning out the blaring hospital alarms. The sterile white corridors of Northwestern Memorial blurred into a chaotic smear as the group moved with frantic, terrifying precision. Luca had violently shoved the heavy fire doors open, leading their descent down the concrete service stairwell. Behind him, Enzo and a surviving guard named Dominic carried Lily's mobile gurney down the steps, their muscles straining against the awkward weight. Dr. Caldwell stumbled alongside them, his face the color of wet ash, desperately clutching the portable IV and heart monitor. And right in the center, an impenetrable shield, was Matteo. He had not let go of Harley's waist since the gunfire ended, his grip bruised and possessive, pulling her down the stairs at a breakneck pace. "Keep her elevated!" Dr. Caldwell shrieked as the gurney tipped precariously around a tight landing on the 3rd floor. "If that central line pulls out, she bleeds out in minutes." "Then don't let it pull out, Doctor," Matteo snapped, his voice a chilling whip crack that echoed in the stairwell. "Enzo, status on the extraction point. The decoy SUVs are swarming the main entrance on Fairbanks Court," Enzo barked, breathing heavily as he gripped the front of the gurney. "Chicago PD is setting up a perimeter. They think we're barricaded on the 4th floor. The subterranean loading dock is clear, but we have a 60-second window before the SWAT teams sweep the basement." Harley clamped a hand over her mouth to muffle a sob, her eyes locked on Lily's pale face. Her little sister was entirely unconscious now, mercifully spared from the terror of their descent. They burst through the heavy basement doors into the echoing cavern of the hospital's underground laundry and loading facility. The smell of bleach was overpowering. 2 matte black armor-plated Mercedes Sprinter vans sat idling in the shadows, their exhaust pluming in the damp, chilly air of the subterranean garage. "Load her into the 2nd van," Matteo ordered, pushing Harley toward the open side doors of the vehicle. Dominic, a stocky enforcer who had been part of Matteo's inner circle for a decade, hesitated. "Boss, protocol dictates you take the lead vehicle. The 2nd van isn't rigged with the reinforced chassis." Matteo froze, his dark eyes snapping toward Dominic. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the loading dock, broken only by the hum of the van engines. Harley watched as the microscopic shift in Matteo's posture transformed him from a fleeing man to an apex predator. "I didn't ask for a recitation of protocol, Dominic," Matteo said softly, the lethal calm in his voice far more terrifying than his shouting. "I said, load her into the 2nd van." Dominic swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his thick neck, but he nodded, helping Enzo lift the gurney into the back of the Sprinter. "Luca," Matteo murmured in Italian, turning slightly so only his giant bodyguard could hear. "Drive the 1st van. Take the ramp up to Ontario Street. Make yourself visible. See who follows." Luca didn't question the suicide mission. He simply nodded, his scarred face grim, and climbed into the driver's seat of the lead Sprinter. Matteo shoved Harley into the back of the 2nd van, climbing in right behind her and slamming the heavy sliding door shut. Enzo took the wheel, with Dominic in the passenger seat. The second they cleared the loading dock, Enzo killed the headlights, plunging them into absolute darkness as they slipped out a maintenance exit and merged into the subterranean labyrinth of Lower Wacker Drive. Lower Wacker was Chicago's underworld in a literal sense, a multi-level, subterranean street system devoid of GPS signals, shrouded in perpetual twilight and lined with concrete pillars. It was a ghost road, perfect for disappearing. Harley huddled on the metal floor of the van, her hands gripping the cold rails of Lily's gurney. Dr. Caldwell was a shaking mess in the corner, frantically checking the battery life on the portable heart monitor. Matteo sat on a tactical bench opposite Harley, his sleek Glock resting casually on his knee. His eyes were glued to the encrypted GPS tablet in his hand, watching the blue dot that represented Luca's van moving above ground. "Talk to me, Luca," Matteo said into his earpiece. For an agonizing minute, there was only static. Then, Luca's rough voice crackled through. "Boss, 2 unmarked sedans just peeled off Ohio Street, tailing me hard. They're O'Connor's men. They were waiting for us at the exit." Harley gasped, looking up at Matteo. If they had taken the lead van, they would have driven straight into another ambush. Matteo's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles threatened to snap. He looked slowly toward the front of the cabin, staring at the back of Dominic's head through the metal grate separating the driver's compartment from the cargo hold. "Keep them occupied, Luca," Matteo ordered. "Enzo, take the Columbus Drive ramp down to the 3rd level. We are going to Chicago Executive Airport in Wheeling. Do not stop for anything." "Copy that," Enzo said, wrenching the steering wheel hard. Tires screeched against the slick, oily pavement of Lower Wacker as they plunged deeper into the dark. Harley reached out in the pitch black, her trembling fingers finding the hem of Matteo's suit jacket. She tugged it, desperate for an anchor in the terrifying darkness. Matteo shifted, moving off the bench to kneel on the floor beside her. In the gloom of the van, the only light came from the faint glow of Lily's medical monitors. He reached out, his large, warm hand covering both of hers, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a surprisingly tender rhythm. "We are going to make it," he whispered, his face inches from hers. The scent of gunpowder and bergamot was intoxicating. "I swore I would protect you, Harley. I have never broken a vow in my life." "Why?" she breathed, the question tearing from her throat. "Why do you care this much? I just pulled your coat, that's all I did." Matteo's dark eyes searched hers, the heavy walls he built around himself showing a momentary, jagged crack. "In my world, everyone wants something. Power, money, territory. You didn't know who I was, and you didn't hesitate to throw yourself into a fire to save a stranger. You are the only pure thing that has touched my life in 10 years. I am not letting Larry O'Connor extinguish that." The raw, unfiltered honesty of his words hit her harder than the blast wave from the exploding Lincoln. Before she could respond, the van lurched violently, accelerating up an access ramp and bursting out of the subterranean darkness onto the Kennedy Expressway, hurtling north toward the private airfield. Rain battered the corrugated steel roof of Hangar 4 at Chicago Executive Airport. The massive space was a fortress, guarded by 20 heavily armed men loyal to the Rossi Syndicate. In the center of the hangar sat a sleek, white Learjet, its engines already whining with pre-flight checks. A specialized medical team was rushing down the air stairs, taking over Lily's care from a thoroughly traumatized Dr. Caldwell. Harley stood near the wing, the cold wind whipping her hair across her face, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. They had safely transferred Lily into the jet's mobile ICU. "You can't come, Ms. Quinn," the flight surgeon had told her gently just moments ago. "The pressure changes at altitude will require our full team to maneuver around the cabin. Besides, mister, Rossi's orders were explicit. You are not on the passenger manifest. Harley spun around, marching away from the jet toward Matteo, who was standing near the front of the hangar with Enzo and Dominic. "You're not letting me go with her?" Harley demanded, her voice cracking with betrayal. "You promised me she would be safe." Matteo turned to face her, his expression resolute. "She is safe, Harley. The second that plane is in the air, she is completely untouchable. But if you get on that jet, you paint a target on its fuselage. Larry O'Connor wants you dead to shame me. If he tracks that flight, he will have it shot out of the sky over the Atlantic. Staying here is how you keep your sister alive." The brutal logic of his words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, wrapping her arms around her stomach as a sob tore out of her. It was agonizing, watching the only family she had left being carried away into the sky. But she knew Matteo was right. She was the bait. Matteo stepped forward, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her tightly against his solid chest. Harley didn't fight it. She buried her face in his cashmere sweater, crying openly as the deafening roar of the Learjet's engines filled the hangar. She clung to him as the plane taxied out into the storm and disappeared into the grey, weeping clouds, carrying her sister to salvation. "She will live," Matteo whispered into her hair, his lips brushing against her temple. "I swear it on my life." As the hangar doors slowly rumbled shut, sealing out the storm, the atmosphere inside shifted instantly. The comforting embrace vanished. Matteo gently pushed Harley behind him, signaling to Enzo. "Dominic!" Matteo called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Dominic stepped forward, though his posture was rigid, his eyes darting toward the exits. "Yes, boss?" "You've been with me a long time," Matteo said, slowly pacing toward the enforcer. His hands were clasped behind his back, a picture of aristocratic grace, masking a lethal intent. "You were there when we took the South Side. You stood by me during the federal indictments in 22. "Always loyal, Matteo," Dominic said, though his voice cracked slightly. "Loyalty is a fragile glass," Matteo mused, stopping 5 feet from the man. "It holds water perfectly until a single tap shatters it. Who else knew the exact room number at Northwestern, Dominic? Who else knew I would be standing in that corridor at exactly 9 a.m.? Dominic swallowed hard. Enzo handled the scheduling. "It could have been, Enzo was with me," Matteo interrupted softly. "Enzo didn't try to put me in the unarmored decoy van an hour ago. Enzo didn't leave a burner phone, pinging off a cell tower in O'Connor territory at 4 a.m. last night, while the rest of us were locked down in the Gold Coast." Dominic's eyes widened in sheer panic. He realized the trap had already sprung. "Larry promised you the Northside ports, didn't he?" Matteo asked, his voice dripping with disgust. "He promised you a seat at the head of the table if you delivered the waitress who ruined his car bomb." With a sudden, desperate roar, Dominic reached for the weapon holstered under his jacket. He didn't even clear the leather. Enzo moved with blinding speed, raising his weapon and firing a single deafening shot. Dominic dropped to the concrete floor, clutching his knee, screaming in agony as blood rapidly pooled around him. Harley gasped, burying her face in her hands, trembling uncontrollably. She had never seen a man shot before today, and now violence was becoming the horrifying rhythm of her existence. Matteo didn't flinch. He walked over to the writhing traitor, looking down at him with eyes devoid of any human empathy. He crouched slightly, leaning in close. "You sold out my family," Matteo whispered coldly. "You sold out the woman who saved my life. You will spend the next 3 days in the basement of this hangar, Dominic, and you will tell Enzo every single move Larry O'Connor plans to make. When you are empty of secrets, you will beg for a bullet. And I will deny you." Matteo stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, completely ignoring the man's pathetic sobbing. He walked back to Harley, who was shaking so hard she could barely stand. He reached out, cupping her face in both of his warm, strong hands. He forced her to look at him, pulling her focus away from the blood on the floor and grounding her in the deep, intense dark of his eyes. "Look at me," he commanded softly. "Harley, look at me." She forced her eyes up, her breathing shallow and frantic. "The rats have been exposed," Matteo said, his thumb wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "The perimeter is secure. From this moment on, we don't run anymore." "What? What are we going to do?" she stammered. A dark, terrifying smile spread across Matteo Rossi's face. It was the smile of a devil who had just been handed the keys to hell. "We go to war," Matteo promised, leaning down until his lips hovered a fraction of an inch from hers. "Larry O'Connor wanted to burn my world. Now I am going to make him watch as I dismantle his, brick by bloody brick." 72 hours had passed since the Learjet disappeared into the stormy Chicago sky. Harley Quinn was pacing the length of the Grand Library inside the Rossi family's heavily fortified estate in Lake Forest, Illinois. The sprawling mansion was a fortress disguised as a luxury chateau, surrounded by wrought-iron gates, security cameras, and heavily armed men patrolling the manicured grounds. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating with anticipated violence. Harley hadn't seen Matteo since they left the hangar. He had vanished into the city, leaving her under the absolute protection of Enzo and a rotating dozen guards. The television in the corner of the library had been running non-stop, broadcasting a sanitized public version of the brutal underworld war Matteo was waging. The news anchors on WGN Channel 9 called it a sudden wave of corporate restructuring and unfortunate accidents. A massive warehouse belonging to O'Connor Shipping at the port of Chicago had inexplicably caught fire. The CEO of Flanagan's Imports, a known money laundering front for the Irish mob, had abruptly resigned and fled the country after federal tip-offs from an anonymous source. Matteo wasn't just killing Larry O'Connor's men, he was dismantling Larry's financial empire, stripping the Irish king of his armor before going in for the kill. "You're going to wear a hole in the antique Persian rug, Harley," Enzo murmured from the doorway, his eyes fixed on a sleek tablet. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes rivaling the charcoal shade of his tailored suit. "I can't just sit here," Harley shot back, crossing her arms over her chest. "I haven't heard from the clinic in Geneva since yesterday, and Matteo has completely fallen off the map. You told me the O'Connors were cornered. If they're cornered, why isn't this over?" Enzo sighed, stepping into the room and setting the tablet on a mahogany desk. "A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, Harley. Larry is bleeding cash and losing territory by the hour. His lieutenants are defecting to us. But Larry still has a core group of loyalists, and they are heavily armed. Matteo is personally leading the sweep through the South Loop. He refuses to delegate this." "Why?" Harley asked, her voice softening, betraying the deep, terrifying ache of worry in her chest. "He's a boss. He has hundreds of men. Why is he on the front lines?" Enzo looked at her, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. "Because Larry didn't just attack a Rossi business. He attacked you. He put a bomb near the woman who saved Matteo's life, and he sent a hit squad into a hospital room where your innocent sister was sleeping. In Matteo's eyes, this isn't business anymore. It's deeply personal." Before Harley could process the weight of that confession, the heavy oak doors of the library swung open. Matteo stood in the doorway, the very picture of a beautiful, ruinous storm. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, and his dark overcoat was stained with ash and rain. He looked exhausted, the sharp angles of his face cast in stark relief by the dim lighting of the library. Yet, when his dark eyes found Harley, the lethal, hardened edge of the Mafia Boss seemed to instantly evaporate. Enzo silently nodded to Matteo and slipped out of the room, closing the heavy doors behind him. Harley didn't think. She simply moved. She crossed the room in seconds, throwing her arms around Matteo's neck. He caught her effortlessly, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her slightly off her feet. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply, as if her scent was the only oxygen left in his burning world. "You're safe," Matteo rasped against her skin, his voice thick with a fatigue he would never show his men. "I've got you." "Are you hurt?" she demanded, pulling back just enough to inspect his face, her hands gently framing his jaw. She traced a new bruise forming along his cheekbone. "Nothing that won't heal," he whispered, leaning into her touch. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek satellite phone. "I spoke to Dr. Orris at the Geneva clinic 20 minutes ago. Lily's surgery was a complete success. The donor heart is strong. She's in recovery, and there are no signs of rejection." A sob of pure, unadulterated relief tore from Harley's throat. Her knees buckled slightly, but Matteo held her firm, pulling her flush against his chest. The crushing weight of the last 3 years, the medical bills, the double shifts at Diner 82, the constant, suffocating fear of losing her sister, finally shattered. "Thank you," she cried softly into his coat. "Matteo, thank you. I told you I would protect her," he murmured, his lips pressing a soft, lingering kiss to the crown of her head. "But my promise to you isn't finished yet." Harley looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his intense gaze. "What do you mean?" Matteo gently stepped back, taking her hands in his. His expression hardened into a cold, terrifying mask of resolve. "Larry O'Connor has retreated to a private warehouse near the old rail yards. He has 6 men left. I am going there tonight to end this permanently." "No!" Harley gasped, her grip on his hands tightening. "Send Enzo. Send Luca. You don't have to go back out there." "Yes, I do," Matteo said softly, his thumbs brushing over her knuckles. "Larry needs to look into my eyes when he draws his last breath. He needs to know that this empire belongs to me, and that the woman he tried to kill is untouchable." Harley stared at him, realizing in that exact moment that she had fallen hopelessly in love with a monster. But he was her monster. He was the man who had burned down a city just to keep her sister alive. "Come back to me," she whispered fiercely, rising on her tiptoes. Matteo's eyes darkened with raw, possessive hunger. He closed the distance between them, his mouth crashing down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, bruising claim. He kissed her like a man going to war, tasting her fear, her relief, and her submission to the dark, chaotic world he ruled. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathless. "I will always come back to you," Matteo promised. Rain poured through the shattered skylights of the abandoned rail yard warehouse, drumming a steady, chaotic beat against the rusted steel beams. Lightning illuminated the cavernous space, casting long, nightmarish shadows. Larry O'Connor, the fallen king of the Chicago Irish mob, knelt on the wet concrete. His once expensive tailored suit was torn and soaked, and he was bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound to his shoulder. Surrounding him in a wide, inescapable circle were Luca, Enzo, and 10 of the Rossi Syndicate's most lethal enforcers. The bodies of Larry's final loyalists lay scattered in the dark corners of the warehouse. Footsteps echoed against the concrete, slow and deliberate. Matteo Rossi stepped into the center of the circle. He held a matte black suppressed pistol at his side. His face was a mask of absolute, chilling indifference. "You think you've won, Rossi?" Larry spat, coughing violently as he looked up at the younger boss. "You think you can just erase a century of O'Connor history in a week?" "I don't think I can, Larry. I know I already have," Matteo replied, his voice dangerously quiet, cutting through the sound of the rain. "Your accounts are frozen. Your politicians have abandoned you. Your men are either dead or swearing allegiance to me. You are a ghost, Larry. You just haven't accepted it yet." Larry let out a dark, ragged laugh. "All this. A city torn apart, millions of dollars burned. Over a diner waitress? You've gone soft, Matteo. You let a skirt compromise the syndicate." Matteo's eyes went pitch black. He stepped forward, raising the pistol until the barrel rested dead center against Larry's forehead. "She didn't compromise my syndicate," Matteo said softly, his finger tightening on the trigger. "She gave me a reason to cleanse it. You tried to take something that belonged to me. That was your final mistake." "Wait!" Larry gasped, raising a trembling, bloody hand. "I have offshore accounts in the Caymans, 30 million in untraceable bonds. It's yours. Just let me walk away. I'll leave Chicago. You'll never see me again." Matteo tilted his head slightly, staring down at the broken man. "Money cannot buy back the fear you put in her eyes." Foot. The suppressed shot barely echoed. Larry O'Connor collapsed onto the wet concrete, lifeless. Matteo didn't blink. He lowered his weapon, turning his back on the body. "Clean this up," he ordered Luca. "Send word to the remaining O'Connor captains. The war is over. The city belongs to the Rossi family." "Yes, boss," Luca rumbled, signaling for the cleanup crew to move in. Matteo walked out into the pouring rain, slipping his weapon into his shoulder holster. The storm was finally breaking, the heavy clouds parting to reveal the faint, bruised light of dawn creeping over the Chicago skyline. For the first time in his life, Matteo didn't feel the weight of the crown he wore. He only felt an overwhelming, magnetic pull toward Lake Forest. When Matteo's armored SUV pulled up to the Grand Estate an hour later, the sun was just beginning to touch the horizon, casting a golden glow over the manicured grounds. He found Harley on the stone balcony, extending from the master suite. She was wrapped in one of his thick cashmere blankets, staring out at the sunrise. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her eyes searching his face for any sign of bad news. When she saw the calm, quiet peace in his dark eyes, she let out a shaky breath and ran to him. Matteo wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. The metallic smell of the rail yard was entirely washed away by the sweet, comforting scent of vanilla and lavender that belonged only to her. "It's done," he murmured into her ear. "Larry is gone. The syndicate is secure. No one will ever threaten you or Lily again." Harley pulled back, looking up at the man who had violently reshaped her entire destiny in less than a week. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "My life. My apartment. The diner. It's all gone." Matteo reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee. That wasn't who he was. Instead, he opened it, revealing a breathtaking, flawless 3-carat diamond ring that caught the morning light like captured fire. "Your old life burned in that explosion, Harley," Matteo said, his voice a low, possessive rumble. "I told you that you belonged to me now, but I also belong to you. I want you by my side, not as a guest, not as a liability, as my queen." Harley looked from the blinding diamond to Matteo's eyes. She thought of the cold, desperate nights at Diner 82, constantly terrified of the future. Then she thought of the fierce, unyielding protection this man offered. He was a creature of darkness, but he had given her sister life, and he had given Harley a love so consuming it defied logic. She smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that took Matteo's breath away and held out her left hand. "Then put it on me," she whispered. Matteo slid the heavy diamond onto her finger, sealing her fate to his. He pulled her flush against him, kissing her with a fierce, eternal promise as the sun rose over the Rossi Empire. The waitress was dead. The Queen had arrived. Did you love this thrilling journey into the dark and dangerous world of the Rossi Syndicate? If Harley and Matteo's explosive love story kept you on the edge of your seat, we need your help to bring more amazing audio dramas to life. Please hit that like button, share this video with your friends who love mafia romance, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Matteo's ultimate revenge. See you in the next video.